Konnichiwa, everyone. This is Kent. Okay, we're gonna have to restart that. All right,
No,
we'll
keep
restart
it.
that.
No, we're keeping
Why?
it.
Okay, fine. All right. Hello, everyone. This is Kenton Hornbeck, fresh off meeting with President Donald Trump at the White House, and I'm joined alongside Logan Decker, who knew about Pearl Harbor before it happened. So, do you have anything to say about that?
It's one of those things where maybe you commit some evil for the greater good, and you're welcome for letting the U.S. become a global superpower, number one, baby. Without it, I don't think we would be here today, but
I like Japan. I'm simply teeing up our first podcast topic, which is March Madness. But before we do that, let's exchange some pleasantries that aren't about the American empire. Logan, how was your week?
it's been good, man. Normal work week. Got some great weather down here. It's sitting 80 degrees right now. Messed around with the golf sim for the first time. Went out. That was fun, different. I I knew where you were going with the intro here. I forgot that it happened this week. But if anybody's not aware, our president is wilding out with the Japanese prime minister with probably a top five Trump comment of all time, in my opinion. And there's a lot to go through, but that's definitely up there. So I appreciate you for reminding me of that event this week.
I have to keep our listeners in the loop. If they're not tuned in about the Iran war, the Japanese prime minister, world oil markets, then why are you listening to this podcast? I mean, really. But as far as my week, pretty good. I moved a couch earlier today. We were unable to get it out of an apartment in OTR, which is in Cincinnati, if y'all aren't aware. And my cousin and I had to sawzall this couch in half in the middle of this apartment because we couldn't get it out the door, because the home back in the day was designed for probably six German tenants in a little small room back in the 1900s or probably late 1800s. So I did that, had some good beer drinking days on Friday and Saturday, played a little golf simulator at Fort Wright's 10 Cup. So that was pretty good. Other than that, I know we have March Madness that kicked off this past work week. I'm in a work bracket right now. I was kind of talking to Logan before this, and within my bracket pool at the office, literally 2 hours ago, I checked it, was in fourth place. I check it right before we go live. I'm in 10th place. I don't really know what happened, but Gonzaga really nuked me. And for some reason, I chose McNeese State to go to the Sweet 16. That did not happen, but we'll get into that in a second. So, Logan, March Madness kicks off. First off, are you doing a bracket pool, anything like that in the office? And then second off, tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the first weekend here.
Yeah, I got a bracket put together. I got Michigan in, winning it all against Duke, but there's been some small hits that have hurt me in any type of bigger money pools. Once again, I have falsely placed my trust in Wisconsin. I had them making it, I believe, to the Sweet 16, and they were one of the first day upsets. So it's a little hurtful at this point. Everybody else has been losses that I could deal with. Like I took Ohio State over TCU. It's like, it's a coin flip. My school that I root for is Louisville. I did not think they would beat Michigan State, and they played a better game than I thought they would. But considering the past 5 years of the Louisville basketball program, I'm happy with where they're at. Considering how bad they were like 4 years ago. Ever since Pitino left, it's been really, really rocky. But I would say I'm middle of the pack right now. I think at the big money pools I'm in, I could probably, if everything goes right from here on out, I could probably be a top 10 place. But it's winner takes all, so looking at the max points, it's just not happening. In terms of do you want to just start off with we'll start off with the surprises that have happened so far because upsets are the biggest thing, with March Madness. And we both had the opportunities to kind of watch pieces of game and maybe watch a couple individual games to its full entirety. Unfortunately, with my work and probably your work to a degree, when it's on, it starts on a Thursday. I'm working and working with various people, and I don't get a lot of time just to like sit there and watch the game. I got the scores maybe on in the background or it's on the TV at work, but I'm not getting a chance to sit down for like an hour to really absorb some stuff. But North Carolina losing to VCU, I would say that's a surprise, but VCU I feel like is a team, that's one team consistently every year that has they perform better than their seeding does. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me. It's just that North Carolina, with the highs that they've had this year, they were one of the few teams that beat Duke. So that was a big win on their resume, but they just couldn't pull it off against VCU. Vandy losing in this, Vandy was coming in really hot to the SEC tournament, so for them to lose to Nebraska isn't a surprise. 4 or 5 seed matchup, and it was a really good game. I caught the ending of that one. That was very fun game, very good. They only 74-72 loss. Let's see. I got the bracket pulled up here. I will say, and I mentioned this before we started the pod, that I have never ever placed my faith in Gonzaga to make a deep dive. So them losing to Texas is not that surprising to me. For the most part, and this might sound a little bad, but I truly don't trust like these smaller, like let's just say religious or Catholic colleges. There's maybe one or two, every tournament that makes a little bit of a run, but when are we going to sit here and realize that Gonzaga, despite them running their conference almost every year, is just not going to be a team that is going to be a true threat? Maybe I'm jumping off the high rope here and I sound crazy, but I just don't understand the hype behind Gonzaga, and I feel like there's always a group of people every year that falls into the hat. Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's been a lot of turnover, in terms of just big surprises or whatnot. This kind of had the feeling that even though, I would say, what was it, 2 years ago that we had just like absolute chaos, various seeds. Last year it was a lot of 1 and 2 seeds, and Houston, and Florida, and then it's kind of looking like, even though there wasn't one particular team that really jumped out, I guess you can make the argument for Duke or Florida. I felt like the number 1 seeds are true 1 seeds, and the 2 seeds down were definitely shakier. So it wouldn't surprise me if we get another year where the Final Four looks like we have 3 1 seeds and a 2 seed, or just something along that line, where it's going to be, hey, the teams that were projected to be there are going to be there. It's just, Florida looks fantastic. Duke, even though Siena played them very well, they beat TCU pretty handedly. Michigan, when you got a team that's not even the number 1 overall seed and they're top 10 in offense, top 10 in defense, and they have arguably the tallest lineup in March Madness this year, they're my favorite to win it. And then Arizona is kind of one of those teams historically I haven't really trusted as much in terms of recent history, but I do feel like their roster is more talented than any other roster they've had in the past 5 years. And I'm not particularly, in my opinion, I think the West is a little bit weaker in terms of the depth of talented teams compared to some of the other regions participating. Let me get you to jump in here and what you're thinking, because I kind of just did a wide array, just kind of overlooking it, and then maybe if you find something in particular, we can do a deep dive into it.
As far as my thoughts on this March Madness go, I think one of the, and I'm not going to like credit myself for coming up with this opinion, but I'd like to expound upon it, is that since NIL was implemented, there's been less there's been less parity in March Madness, less upsets, because all of the talent at the smaller schools rises to the top. And it's not specifically NIL on its own, it's also the transfer portal. So let me give you an example. And I know Miami of Ohio got knocked out, and I don't really know a lot about their roster. I'm just using this as a placeholder. So Miami of Ohio, I believe they finished the season at 31-2. They were consistently one of the top mid-major programs in college basketball throughout the season. Now, because of the transfer portal and the influence that NIL money has over transfer decisions, who's to say that Miami of Ohio's best players don't get, not bribed, but they enter the transfer portal. They get offered a certain amount of money from a Power 5 school, which has a larger platform, greater alumni base, more exposure to pro scouting. So with all of those factors combined, what's stopping a team like a Houston, for example, from spending a bunch of money to get the best players from Miami of Ohio onto Houston, and then now those players who have seasoned resumes because they're older in college basketball, they have a lot more experience, they're able to immediately contribute to a contending team. So essentially the cream of the crop programs can just buy the best players from the smaller programs, and with that, it lessens the impact that these smaller schools can have on March Madness. One of the things we love as Americans, as basketball fans, as college basketball fans, is the opportunity to see something special. Think VCU in 2011. Think George Mason in 2006. These teams that go on these long runs who are unheralded from a smaller conference, we love the Cinderella story. It's what makes March March. Now, if these bigger programs, a la Duke, Connecticut, Kentucky, whoever, are able to just purchase the players from these smaller teams who maybe got some exposure by making March Madness or some noise in the conference tournament, or they have their scouting departments scouring the NCAA for potential recruit or transfer targets, then they're able to just poach those players, pay them a bunch of money, have a super team roster, and then go into the NCAA tournament where they're primed to make a run. Now, it's not that upsets can't happen anymore. I don't want to go in on that. Of course it can happen. It's basketball. That's the sport. It's not like these teams are full of scrubs. You know what I mean? But it was taking the already unlikely chance of an upset happening and making it even less likely. And I think we're seeing the impact of that this first weekend in March Madness. I can't really think of a massive upset this entire weekend, especially, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is High Point University winning against Wisconsin, I believe. We were talking about that a little bit earlier. That's an upset, but it was a classic 5 versus 12 upset. You can usually pencil a few of those in every single March Madness. So while it is surprising, and I do like it, it's also not as magical, say, as a 14 beating a 3 or a 15 beating a 2. I would say that High Point also, their university, is known for spending large quantities of money to build up their campus and put money into their sports programs. So while it is a mid-major school, I think they're kind of flush with cash, and so it's a little bit different at High Point. Now maybe, I don't want to say that's one-to-one comparison like that happens for their basketball team. I'm just saying, when that is the only school who's really had an upset this past weekend, it kind of goes to show how the influence of money and prestige has impacted a product we all enjoy together in March Madness. I think as far as the tournament goes, we've got some really good moments already. Off the top of my head, Kentucky beating Santa Clara, who was a popular upset pick in the first round of the tournament. Otega Owe, Kentucky's guard, hit a big, just before half-court shot to send Kentucky into overtime before they pulled away in the overtime period. Right before he hit that shot, Santa Clara hit a big three with, I think, about 3 seconds left. Kentucky goes up the court. Owe hits the three and sends it to overtime. It was a really cool last sequence. That's why you love March Madness. Kentucky overall was not a great team this year. I would say they were probably slightly above average. If a team like Duke is elite, Kentucky was in that not even top 25 range, probably a tier below that. So they weren't as good as they generally are. They were a popular upset candidate, as Santa Clara had a pretty good season. And then you've had some other good games. You mentioned the North Carolina versus VCU game. That was really interesting. VCU hit a really big shot there at the end of the game, and then North Carolina kind of fumbled around, fumbled their chance, never really got momentum. Hubert Davis, not a very good coach. He's wasting his time. He's wasting North Carolina's time. I know he's an alumni of the school. People like him, but he's not it, folks, and I think the UNC fans know that. Similar commentary is happening about Mark Pope and Kentucky, but Mark Pope, say he's able to pull off this win against Iowa State today, he'd have 5 NCAA tournament wins in his first 2 seasons, and even though he struggled in the regular season, if he's able to make 2 straight Sweet 16s, I think that's pretty good, especially with how they're trying to work through spending money and the roster and everything. So overall, I would give this first weekend of March Madness a 6 out of 10. Maybe that's underrating it a little bit. I don't find myself as invested as I generally am because, as you were saying, we work, we have a lot of things to do all day. But I think a lot of that also comes down to 2 things specifically for myself. One being Kentucky was just kind of meh this year, and they are the team that I root for. They're the team that I follow the most. I want them to do good. They're actually playing right now. But I wouldn't say they were a true threat to actually win the tournament, which is kind of disappointing. The other thing is my alma mater, Western Kentucky University, is not in the tournament. They don't make it very often, but I think if you go to a smaller school, especially one with a rich basketball tradition, you'd like to see your program represented in the tournament. They made it not last year, but the year before, gave Marquette a little bit of a scare. They were up at half against that Marquette, who was a 2 seed, and they weren't able to get it done. But however, it's always more fun when the teams that you like are in the tournament and doing good. The last thing I'll say is my Final Four was Michigan, Connecticut, Houston, and I think Duke. I can't remember. But regardless, I picked Houston and Michigan in the championship. And the reason being is I thought Houston could make it back there and get revenge time on some teams because they came up just short. And even though they had that legendary win against Duke, they didn't ultimately pull it out. So I'd like to see Houston and Michigan in the championship, if for no other reason than to say my bracket is doing pretty good. Also, I want to add really quick, y'all, if you're listening to this and my nose sounds all stopped up, that's because it is, and I apologize if I sound nasally. So,
Yeah, I want to expand on a couple points you made. First off, because I'm not in the Kentucky area, I did not realize that there was already somewhat of a hot seat for Pope at Kentucky, which that's BBN for you. But I would also like to say, just in terms of the basketball dynamics, and maybe this is a point that people, I think some people recognize, but the fact that the SEC in the past 5 to 10 years have all of a sudden kind of, I don't want to say came out of the, this was their first time being a basketball powerhouse. It was like, wow, seems like the switches got flipped for all these things because Alabama, let's say under Nick Saban, they were not a serious basketball program. Alabama is a program. Florida has come back and they are been dominant. You have Vandy going on a great run. You have Tennessee that's having a more consistency in the past few years. I feel like what used to be, I could say the ACC was probably the predominant basketball conference. However, it's definitely more split now. SEC has definitely come on way stronger considering that, how many of the teams are still in the tournament representing the SEC. The Big Ten, I would make an argument, has been more solidified with some of their programs. And then the Big 12, I think they might have been you always had Kansas as consistent, but now Kansas, the past 3 years has not even been the top dog in their conference, I feel like. So you're seeing a lot of, which is really, it's fun, it's good for the sport. You're seeing a lot of different teams and kind of these different conferences kind of have a little bit of a change up within it. And that's bringing together some new, kind of highlight points for university and fandoms. If you were a Houston basketball fan 15 years ago, you were not, you're like, oh, okay, 15 wins. Yeah, so many teams have kind of, who have rightfully maybe managed their money with their alumni base and joined a different conference. They've been able to make a larger jump. And I think that is, in terms of basketball, it's easier, or it seems easier, to make a transition to being a very, very competitive program as compared to football, where it's maybe has some other dynamics to it. And I would say, in terms of the transfer portal and whatnot, I've always thought in the NILs that, definitely more, I think it's bigger headlines in football, but, for let's say NCAA Division I, there's only 138 Division I football programs in the country. For basketball, there's 355. So, yes, a football team definitely has more players on it, more players on the roster than the basketball team does. But if there's so many additional schools, and that means you can pluck players from different places that, it's like, oh, this guy went off and he's playing for, New Mexico State. And even though they don't get the national TV time, it's the roster transfers. And it's funny because it's what I always thought of as like the first league to really be like, all right, star power, move it around. You see so many trades, NBA. Well, now it's like, now the college game has definitely represented that, maybe to a higher degree, not trades, but the amount of people that or players that can change teams and get different NIL deals. And like you said, it's like, hey, in this, with the NBA, it's like, hey, you only got 60 draft slots. You can be an unsigned free agent, but you need the exposure. So hopping teams, if you're really trying to get to the next level, is going to be your best bet. In terms of, football, it helps, but it's not necessarily. So, it's like, hey, Khalil Mack was still a top 5 pick coming out of Buffalo. If the talent's there, the talent is there. NFL prospects will find it and note it. But, it's so much more difficult, I think, in terms of basketball to really establish yourself. If you're not already established, you're not like one of those big AAU guys coming up and you're already a top 10 prospect in the country. I'm like, this March Madness and you jump in different teams could be the thing that gets your ticket to the next league. And then the other point I was going to make, so we talked about Pope, the UK, the D1 schools. I would agree with you. I feel like when we were younger and we had more time available, we definitely got a lot more invested. It also helps that at that time, UK was probably a 1 to 2 seed every year, and for me, Louisville was always a major thorn in the side, top 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 seed, and our teams are kind of going through some, let's just say, restructures the past 5 years for both of us. I'm wondering with Arkansas here, because I can make the argument Calipari's had a lot of success at Arkansas. How many, let's just say if this trajectory were to continue, where let's say Pope is still doing solid, but Arkansas still being a staple in the SEC, give or take 2 to 3 more years, how many more people, current UK fans are like, man, maybe we shouldn't have got rid of Calipari, just because I understand it, like, to a degree, some change needed to happen, but I also don't think that some UK fans recognize the change I mentioned earlier, where it's like, hey, the SEC basketball is back, and you can make the argument they have the best basketball conference as well. You know, you're seeing all these programs kind of get rejuvenated with this money and in-laws. Do you think that's a possibility to where maybe Calipari gets to set up a new foundation and UK fans are a little, let's just say, they know that, I don't want to say that they made a mistake, but you get what I'm trying to say here, where it's like, hey, do you think UK jumped the gun with Calipari?
I do not. I think it was time for a separation. I thought it lingered a little bit too long, in fairness to both Coach Cal and the Kentucky Athletic Department. I don't think the situation was going to be tenable. And honestly, to John Calipari's credit, he recognized that people were yearning for change within the fan base, but also probably across the athletic department and the university. And it's not because they didn't like John. I think John became either apathetic a little bit, or he didn't have the same passion or flair that he generally did earlier in his UK career, because he had a contractual situation that essentially was guaranteeing him a job. And unless he quit or the university fired him and he had to pay, they had to pay him out, he was kind of in a, like, why leave anywhere? They're giving me more money than anybody else. And I think he kind of malaise set over the program. And the landscape of college basketball changed around John Calipari, and he did not do at Kentucky a good enough job of adapting to it in order to make Kentucky fans feel like they were truly competing for a championship every single year. But do I think Kentucky, to answer your original question, do I think Kentucky fans have some sort of regret over getting riled up and essentially turning public opinion against John Calipari and forcing the university and the athletic department to make a decision, and then subsequently hiring Mark Pope and see how it's gone? You know, apples to apples, I think, honestly, probably I would say 60-40 in favor of Pope at the moment, as opposed to Cal regret. If, like I said, Pope is able to make the Sweet 16 or even farther in the tournament, maybe say an Elite Eight, they kind of have a decent shot here. I mean, it is college basketball. They don't have an overwhelming roster, but they do have some experienced players. They do have talent. They've lost a lot of close games. They've gotten into, one of the problems with this year's Kentucky team specifically is they dig themselves into these massive holes that are almost impossible to dig out of. I'm sure you watched did you watch UK Louisville earlier this year?
I caught bits and pieces of it.
So that game was a great example of how a lot of Kentucky games look throughout the season. As Louisville was really putting it to them in the first half, probably early second half, Kentucky kind of claws their way back in. I think they get within like 6, and they're not able to overtake Louisville. They kind of just linger there and lose by like 10 or 11. I can't exactly remember. But that's a lot of Kentucky games this year. So people knew that if Kentucky was able to, you know, give up this big lead, they're essentially out. And that's been a hallmark so far of the Pope experience. And I think with almost 2 years of Pope under their belt, I still think UK fans are feeling like they could have gotten a better coach in the hiring process. But I will say that I do think Pope and the athletic department and the fan base are learning together. And Pope, this is a job unlike any other. And I think spiritually and rhetorically and even historically through his legacy at the university, he is the right guy for the job. And if he's able to do enough in the postseason, fans will give him enough grace. Say they make the Elite Eight, just off the rip. and then next year they come out and have a similar regular season, I still think there's fans that are going to be upset, and they want more. They want to be in the mix with Duke, Connecticut. They are not content with being a 7 seed, but he can get away with it if he's able to rack up some tournament wins. Last year was the first year. It's kind of an experimental year. This year, they wanted to see improvement. They arguably saw regression. And so that's where a lot of UK fans are like, we jumped too soon. We missed Cal. At least Cal keeps us in the mix. He's relevant. My contention with that is that if the relationship was to continue as previously constituted, there would not be this situation, both for John Calipari at Arkansas, but also for Kentucky to shed its skin and recreate itself as a new program. Furthermore, one of the issues, there's two primary issues with the John Calipari Kentucky era over the past 3 or 4 years at the end there, is that John Calipari and his priorities were all mixed up, especially at the end, in my opinion, and especially judging from his public statements. Everybody knows that all Kentucky fans care about is winning. That's it. And I genuinely mean that. It is not relevancy. It is not NBA players. It is not enlarging the fan base. It is none of that. It is winning. You have to win. That's all they care about. If a Kentucky team goes 15-10, hypothetically, or whatever, and they make the Final Four, I think they're cool with that. John Calipari's number one priority at Kentucky seemed to not be winning. Not that it wasn't his number one. Of course he wanted to win. I'm not saying that. But, it wasn't forefront, top of mind. He wasn't going into the office every day thinking, I'm sure he was, but it wasn't conveyed in a way that made him feel like, man, we're not doing as well as we used to. We got to get back to where we need to be. He was kind of past that. Okay, I think Calipari did everything he could have done at the University of Kentucky, and it was running on fumes there at the end. He almost, if people remember, left for UCLA, I think after 2019, 2020, but UK upped his contract to keep him in the mix. I don't think they were ready to make a change at that point in time. Cal spooked them by flirting with UCLA, and so they were like, oh, here's some money. And I think that elongated the inevitable situation. Cal at Arkansas, I think, is actually probably one of the perfect programs for John Calipari. The fan base does care a lot, but they're not. It's not like Kentucky. Arkansas and Kentucky fans are similar in a lot of ways, but Kentucky basketball specifically has this Ohio State football, Alabama football kind of air to it, which is why they're so hated. It's because the fans are completely irrational. They don't really give you the benefit of the doubt, and they will drive the bus over you with no hesitation. They will back up that bus and then drive it over you 4 or 5 more times after you're already dead. That is what Kentucky fans do, and I love them. I'm a Kentucky fan till the day I die. But Cal, when he goes to Arkansas, what does he get? Well, he's still in the SEC. He's in a familiar conference. He already knows all of the administrators, et cetera, so those relationships are already built in. What he also gets is massive amounts of NIL money, way more than he would ever get at Kentucky. Kentucky's spending the most on a roster. That's great. Kentucky is not Arkansas rich. I want to say this again if you all don't understand. Kentucky is not Arkansas rich. Arkansas has John Tyson, who runs Tyson Foods. You probably know them from Tyson Chickens, multi-billion-dollar company. Jerry Jones, owner of the Dallas Cowboys, oil magnate. Arkansas alumni, Walmart, Sam Walton, Alice Walton, whoever, the Walmart family, Arkansas. Arkansas has more money than God, and all of their rich donors all went to Arkansas, even the Waltons. And they own that university. These rich people do. So Cal has access to all of this financing, and he also doesn't have as much expectations to win. And in fairness to Cal, he already did win. He won so much at Kentucky in the early stages of that, from 2010 to 2017. Kentucky was untouchable. I mean, genuinely. I think they got upset here or there, like the North Carolina Luke May shot. That was a time they could have won the national championship. They could have won in 2013. They came up short to Shabazz Napier and UConn. However, I would contend that if they didn't lose that championship game, they would not have been in place to have the 38-1 team, which also came up short against Wisconsin in the Final Four. Duke ended up winning that year. So there's definitely some letdowns within that elite period. But from 2010 to 2017, they were completely elite. Then I think around after the COVID year, because they were good that year, COVID cancels the tournament, and then from then on, they were never quite the same. They got upset in the first round by St. Peter's famously, and then they lost to Oakland University. Jack Golke went off, hit a bunch of threes. I really like that team with Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham, but it is what it is. Now, Calipari has all of these. He's still got his recruiting pipeline. He's now got a bunch of money to the NIL through the University of Arkansas, and he has less fan expectations. And because he's a legendary coach and he has this aura around him, he could still be Coach Cal, kind of. So I think that worked out for him, and I think they're doing well. And actually, I'm kind of happy for him. Now, I don't love Arkansas the program. They still have these kind of cheap. One of my issues with the Calipari UK teams, and we'll get to my second point here in a second, is they still feel kind of manufactured. It doesn't feel like it has the same vigor or spirit as some other teams because it's so transactional in nature, and that's the way he works. He's like a mafia don, and his players are his soldiers or underbosses. That's kind of the way it feels. It's not as much about the jersey on the front as it is about John Calipari, and I think that, as my second point, and you're talking about the separation and the regret, is I think that was the separation was a split for the spirit of UK basketball. It was a fight for the soul of UK basketball. Do we be this corporate brand who's just a one-and-done factory, and that's what we pump our chests out about, or do we want to be a team who's all about, and not that John Calipari didn't care about the fans or do any good philanthropic works throughout the state of Kentucky. I think he was a good ambassador for the state, and I do respect him a lot for that. But I do think that the what it meant to be a Kentucky basketball player really diminished under John Calipari. Corporately, I think it grew a bunch, but spiritually, and all the Kentucky fans that we know, and how we grew up in this. Not that you were a UK fan, but you're just as familiar with it as anybody else. You know how that vigor, this is what people do here. They don't give a flying F about the NFL. They don't care about college football like that. They don't care. They care about one thing. I need people to understand one thing. They care about Kentucky basketball. That is it. That gets butts in or on couches whenever they play. It is an event. It's like going to church on Sunday. That's what people care about. And Mark Pope had that. And I think fans wanted that. And if they were able to get the winning and the spirit and put them together, then UK basketball is flourishing, and that's what they want. In the beginning, the winning, fans were so hungry for the winning with Calipari that they didn't care how he really operated his business. They just wanted to be able to taunt and say, we're number one again. But when that went away, then it really felt hollow. And I think that's where they had the problem. So, long rant, but to end, I will say that I still think, personally, that Kentucky made, and John Calipari made the right decision to separate. And the second part is I think I still think they're on the Mark Pope train, although I do feel like there's still some apprehension about possibilities they could have gotten, and that is Pope quite the right man for the job. He wears the suit, he wears the flag, he wears it with pride, but is he the best coach? That's still the question. Cal wasn't the best coach necessarily, but he knew how to run a program. He did everything, and his coaching, you can get away with it because he has so much talent. So in essence, that's my answer.
Damn, that was a fantastic synopsis of Calipari and UK basketball there. I think the only thing I would add on is that what Calipari did that was so unique in my eyes when he came onto the scene, which a lot of other coaches, many coaches did not have the power that he did, was really embracing the one and done era where he's like, to your degree, he's like, maybe the winning is, yes, a priority, but it's not the highest priority. I think his main selling point to all the top basketball players in the country was, you want to go to the NBA, look at who I've gotten in the NBA. I'll make sure you can get in the NBA. That's always been his biggest selling point, was get the most talent, get as much talent as you can on the team, and reshuffle next year. And for a large part of that, it worked. It worked fantastically. My biggest critique of Calipari and his UK basketball teams was almost always there was a lack of, and you could tell with certain games and opponents that they would play, is that because you're having to refresh most of the roster every year, there is no, meshing of these players together where it felt like, hey, UK's playing like an all-star style kind of game, and then they run into a team that's got some veterans that's been playing for 3 to 4 years, and you can tell that there's a weakness of those UK teams, and it was basically like, we're going to try to over-talent everybody else. And I think in the first half of Calipari's run with UK, that was very, very doable, because it was always, let's just say in terms of the SEC, it would be like, okay, here's UK head and shoulders above everybody else. You maybe have one or two other teams that are kind of in the second tier, it kind of changes every couple years, and then the rest. And now it's gotten to the point where, towards the end of it, it's like, all right, you're seeing these other programs rise up. Alabama was the one that, for me, just kind of came up out of nowhere, because I was always like, Alabama's a football school, and then, oh, look at that, now they're a basketball powerhouse, and it just flipped like a switch, just like that. I would love, the one thing that I haven't dug into it recently, is I like to look at what sports generate revenue for different schools. For the most part, if you look at the average university, if it's football number one, men's basketball, and then everything else is generating a negative. I would like to see, let's just say, if you look at a school like Kentucky, or like you said, Duke, whatever, how much money their basketball team generates compared to, let's say, I don't know, I'm picking up like Vanderbilt or, Texas or something, where it's like, all right, they do have some solid basketball programs, but it's definitely, maybe Vandy isn't the best example of it, but Texas with, their football, just to see how much money this program, this high caliber or high regard program, makes compared to the other, I don't know, let's just say Maryland's basketball team. What's the revenue difference there? It's just a random thought, and I'm sure I could dive into it at a different time, because it'd take me too much time to research, but that's just something I've always been curious about. Well, update. Kentucky is currently playing Iowa State right now, and there's 3 minutes left till the first half is complete, and they are up 28-23. So right. We'll have to see. Maybe this Pope conversation gets changed the next time we meet together, or potentially by the time this is over. We'll probably be done by the time this game finishes out, just because that's basketball in the second half. Unless you have anything in particular you want to dive into further about March Madness.
I have one more thought about the Pope Cal thing, and then we'll move on to our preeminent segment here. Is that I thought what you said about the one and dones was right, and I don't think I ever explicitly said one and dones. I think it was probably implied or at least baked into my analysis, but that was a big part of it, and specifically in the beginning of the Calipari run, is when it was innovative. When he did that at Memphis, and he went full bore on that, he was able to accumulate all the talent, get these 10 hired guns, and put them on the floor, and then out talent everybody, and it worked really, really well at a smaller school in conferences that weren't as good, because the talent level was not. It didn't matter about the veteran presence or the experience or the tactical execution as much, because if you have Derrick Rose, you're going to be good. You're just going to give Derrick Rose the ball and he's going to go score. Now, I don't think people remember, but at that time, there were a lot of conversations about, is John Calipari's methodology, is that translatable to Power 5? And not specifically Power 5, but a school like Kentucky. Is this system going to work? Because you were hiring Cal, you're also hiring his philosophy. And in the beginning, because it was so, what he did in the first year at Kentucky was completely revolutionary, and I don't think there will be a coach that quite ever does that again. When you get a number one like a John Wall, and then you go find a DeMarcus Cousins, you do have some veteran players like a Patrick Patterson who is really good, a Darius Miller. They stick around. I still contend that if Jody Meeks, who is like a 10-year NBA veteran and a 1,000-point scorer at Kentucky, if he had returned for his senior year, I genuinely believe they win the championship that year. However, that was a revolutionary team. And what John Calipari did fundamentally is change the entire landscape of college basketball. We call the NFL a copycat league because when somebody comes in and has a revolutionary offensive style or is super innovative, all the other coaches look at their playbooks, they go back and watch the film, and then they implement those schemes into their own playbooks, or they go out and try to hire an undercoach, essentially, who runs a similar type of scheme, and then before you know it, the whole league is playing a similar style of offense to the one guy who was the kind of mold breaker. And John Calipari, not through his on-the-court tactics, but through his program philosophy and his roster-building philosophy, everybody else decided to go one and done. And so when John Calipari was at the forefront in the beginning, where he was the up-and-comer and the upstart at Kentucky, even though he was still an entrenched coach, at that level, he was catching everybody surprised. They were definitely able to out-talent everybody in the SEC because the SEC wasn't as deep. And when it got into the tournament, they did come up short a couple of times, but it ultimately culminated in the 2012 championship. Now, what happened after that is that all of the other teams implemented their own one-and-done schemes, namely Duke, who was the premier example of this. And you could argue, which I probably do believe, that Coach Mike Krzyzewski did Cal better than Cal actually did Cal. Now, did that result in all of the NBA players just going to Duke? Not in the beginning, but I'll tell you what, it did from about 2014 to 21 or whenever Coach K's last year was. I mean, the only year I knew Kentucky was better than Duke certainly was that 2015 year where they went 38-1, but Duke ended up winning the championship because Kentucky ran into an experienced Wisconsin team. So as the landscape shifted, when in the beginning, when Cal was the Einstein, so to speak, he was able to catch everybody off guard. He was able to win. But then the landscape shifted to what he was doing. Now he had a lot more competition for some of these top guys. They weren't just automatically going to Kentucky because Cal was there. They had options. And then I think as it went on and the landscape started to shift, Cal was not adaptable enough. And that's where the friction came in with the winning. That's where it came in. Is because it became clear, especially with the rise of Villanova. You had Virginia winning a championship, a lot of those type of teams. Duke was still good in the mix. But you had those squads clearly demonstrating to people that continuity mattered, leadership mattered, and they were winning championships. And Kentucky fans were like, well, we love having our guys in Kentucky blue for 3 to 4 years. And we see Villanova, who doesn't have as much resources, and they still have a good coach, and they're keeping their guys around, and they're still going to the NBA, and they're doing good. Why can't we have that here? And so they became resentful at Calipari because he was intentionally kind of skirting the spirit of Kentucky basketball or what it had been up to that point. But Cal's the CEO. He's trying to run the team, blah, blah, blah. And I would also argue that what really did Cal in is toward the end of the teens, let's say, the first big one was Zion Williamson not going to Kentucky. When that happened, I cannot understate how much of a shift this was in college basketball. If Zion Williamson was in the class of 2014, if he's in the class of 2012, he's going to Kentucky. It is clear as day he's going to Kentucky. People are like, well, he still could have gone to Duke. He's a Carolina kid. It's like, no, I'm telling you, Cal gets those guys. Cal was still getting top guys, but he was not getting the cream of the crop. Just because you get a 5-star recruit does not mean that kid's going to be a good basketball player. Duke was out recruiting Kentucky for the top basketball players, the top ones. Kentucky was still getting 5 stars. They were still getting good players, but it wasn't the same kind of thing. Ultimately, then the landscape completely shifted around Cal in the early 2020s, and he just could not adapt. And then that's where the friction came in. But my overarching point is when Cal was early to the game, when he was the innovator on the scene, that is when Kentucky basketball was at their best under the Calipari era. Then when he had to compete on the same level as everybody, they were pretty good, but they weren't really able to get over the hump again. And then as the landscape shifted away from one and done, he was thoroughly unable to adapt. Now I think with the fresh legs at Arkansas, he's been able to carry himself quite well, and I think that's worked out for Arkansas. So that's kind of my synopsis there, but I'm glad you brought up the one and done point.
Yeah, it is a very interesting arc just in the college basketball universe, because if you were a fan of any team at that point, paid attention to college basketball, you knew very well what type of innovation was going on there. And now it's kind of just like with football, I keep calling it the Wild West, is that you may not be the top recruiter, but it's more about the transfer portal. It's like, all right, getting a guy that went to Cleveland State that averaged 22 points a game, bring him in, and all of a sudden he's your second best scorer on the team. That's where college basketball is at right now. So you could definitely see what might be interesting now is that some of these top or higher recruits coming out of high school, maybe they don't get the playing time as early, or maybe they're in a role, more of a role player situation. Maybe just because of the amount of transfers. And I think this will even out, but just how football has had like the COVID years and all that, basketball's had it too, is that you will start to see maybe some guys that it's like, hey, maybe they don't really truly touch the court until their sophomore year, junior year, just because the talent stack is so much higher at the top, and you got to go through these couple years and condense it. Or you just see those younger guys, hey, I went on and took a scholarship to Duke, and I haven't played, and you know what, screw it, I'm going to go play at, NC State instead. Maybe you see some of that too, where some of those guys want the time, they didn't get it, so they said, all right, I'm just going to go to who wants me. So you'll see both of those. That's really the final point. The college basketball is really, I think it's at a good spot right now, but there's some interesting things. It changes just like any other sport, and the college landscape for all sport is happening like this to a degree. That being said, we will definitely keep talking about college basketball in the next episode, especially, it'll be past Sweet 16 at that point, probably around Elite 8 time frame most likely. If not, maybe a little bit further. I don't have the full schedule pulled up in front of me. But, yeah, that's the Elite 8 at that point that'll be going on. The next segment we wanted to talk about is NFL hell. And what I'm thinking about on this one is like Dante's Inferno. There's different layers to hell. And I want to start at the bottom layer. This is disgusting, and I'm sorry if you're a fan of this franchise. And this segment kind of got brought up just because of a trade that happened earlier this week, and that is Jalen Waddle being traded, wide receiver for the Dolphins, to the Denver Broncos. And they basically get a first-round pick back, and they get a fourth-round pick, I believe, and a third. So a first, a third, a fourth, giving up Waddle. The reason why I put this out there, even though they had just signed their new franchise quarterback with Malik Willis, is with all the players that they have gotten right out of, this organization has decided we are going to completely clean house. So in this order, so Tua Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Jalen Ramsey, Minka Fitzpatrick, Bradley Chubb. Here is their dead caps on each of their contracts. $55 million, $28 million, $23 million, $20 million, $12 million, $10 million. And that's me rounding down, not rounding up. Between these 5 players, this total dead cap is $179,205,000. That is 50.81% of their 2026 total cap space. Holy shit. So this tweet also inspired this. As I saw a tweet, and I'm sure you saw it too, is that their dead cap situation is so significant that it is more than the past 2 years combined of the Miami Marlins baseball roster, their payout. Insane, which shows you how cheap the Marlins are and just shows you how much the Dolphins are willing to throw money into an open flame and just screw it. What I will say about this is in terms of what they're prepping up for, they do have 12 picks coming into this draft. They have 2 firsts, 11th and a 30th, 1 second, 43rd overall. They have 4 thirds, 68th, 75th from Houston, 94th from Denver, 95th from Philly, 2 fourths, one of those from the Denver, a 5th and a 7th. So it's pretty obvious that the plan is, hey, we just got to clear the books. We're going to take this dead cap. We're going to bring in all this. Hopefully they just draft purely on talent, who's the best guy available, just to litter the roster with it. But this roster, I kid you not, I would be shocked if any other team finishes worse. They're going to get the number 1 pick overall next year. I do not see another team being this bad. They have some weaker pillar pieces, placeholders set up on their O-line and the defensive front 7. Aaron Brewer, the center, Austin Jackson, right tackle, Zach Seiler, defensive tackle, Jordan Brooks, middle linebacker, Chop Robinson, defensive end. But these guys are not all pros. They're not close to being all pros. They're not going to be third team, whatever. They're by far their weakest positions are their wide receiver room, which is led by Tutu Atwell, Jalen Tolbert, Malik Washington, Terrence Marshall Jr. Malik Washington as your wide receiver 1 is disgusting. DBs, Duck Storm, Lonnie Johnson Jr., Dante Trader Jr., Darrell Baker Jr. This team basically said, fuck it. We're going to do a hard reset. We're not going to be good for the next 2 to 3 years, at least. They're like, and they do this draft, and they're probably going to accumulate some more picks going into the next year as well. But what they're doing, I understand why they're doing it. I just think, God, you're torturing your fan base. And you're just letting the Bills and the Patriots just run it without any sense of competition. Like, this feels like, it's like all those stories years ago, we're tanking for Tua. I'm like, this team has stripped the walls out. They have stripped all the appliances out. This is just a bare bones house with a foundation and wood up. There's no walls. And it's, God, I'm so sorry, Dolphins fans. This is awful. And my main point is, I don't understand why they trade Waddle, because you're already so much dead cap in. You might as well keep the younger wide receiver that's had some promise and give your new quarterback at least a new weapon. So you trade him, and then at this point I'd be like, well, I guess with your first 3 picks, one of your first or one of your second, you got to take a wide receiver. Otherwise, who the hell is he going to throw to? Greg Dulcich? That's your number 1 option. This just roster is so damn bad, and they made a notable amount of signings, not in terms of players, but just number of players, just to try to piece in that defense. But none of them are going to be a difference maker. This is going to be a team that I guarantee you is probably bottom 10 in offense and defense efficiency, yards, any other stat line you can think of. And it's pretty damn impressive to intentionally try to be worse than the Jets. That's a pretty low bar. So what was your reaction to these cuts have happened for a while, and Waddle kind of spurred this for me. What was your thoughts on the Waddle trade, and how sorry do you feel for Dolphins fans?
I was pretty surprised about the Waddle trade when it initially happened, but I will say, in hindsight, judging by the Dolphins' laundry list of other choices, I think it went along with their ultimate plan to just completely move on from the Mike McDaniel era, blow it up, and move forward. It did, however, seem to zap them of any type of talent in their wide receiver room at all. Jalen Waddle's a good player. I think ultimately his career is going to be, fine moving forward. But, in the beginning, I was like, oh, wow, they're really going for this. Like, as far as the blow up is concerned, that was where my initial reaction was based. Now, as far as the Dolphins fans, my Uncle David, he's in his 60s. He's a Dolphins fan, and he became a Dolphins fan watching the Miami Dolphins of the 1970s, the Don Shula era Dolphins, and their, subsequent good teams. He really came to enjoy them through watching them on TV. He's still a Dolphins fan today. I would say that's probably his favorite sports team besides like University of Louisville basketball. So the Dolphins are a proud fan base. They had a lot of success in the early days of the post-merger NFL. And through that, they've had a lot of generations of fans. They were good in, the 70s. They were good in the 80s. They were still all right in the 90s. And then from, I would say, the Dan Marino era, once it ended in like 2000, from then on, it's been pure mediocrity of the highest degree. Indiana Pacers levels of mediocrity. I don't think you could find a team that's either been, their ceiling was completely mediocre at like 8-8. That was the joke. After Jeff Fisher left the Titans and went to the Rams, where he subsequently continued on his streak of being Jeff Fisher, I think the Dolphins kind of subsumed that mantle of being the, hey, we're going 8-8 every year kind of joke. And with that, I think it's always really bothered Dolphins fans that they've never been able to reclaim any sort of glory at the top levels of the league. Now, I'm not going to go in and talk about the Patriots. Obviously, it's a sore spot because the New England Patriots became really good over the past 20 years. They won a bunch of Super Bowls, et cetera, et cetera. That's always, I'm sure, made Dolphins fans upset. But what I really think made Dolphins fans upset is the complete lack of competitiveness that they were able to demonstrate throughout the 2000s, I'll say the Tom Brady, Bill Belichick era. Yes, they did have games where they one-off beat New England. New England seemed to always lose one to the Dolphins every year. But winning divisions, yeah, not really. Making the playoffs, here and there, but not really. And it's not like they didn't have any talent. I mean, the Dolphins have had some really talented players over the past couple years specifically, but even before that. And I know that Dolphins fans are probably pretty upset with how the Mike McDaniel era turned out because, again, they were young, they were exciting. I think didn't they put up like 72 points on the Denver Broncos a couple of years ago? That was the Dolphins coming out party. They're like, wow, here come the Dolphins. They're young, exciting. They're in Miami. Dolphins are back, and they were never really truly back because this team was soft. They crumbled toward the end of the season. And Mike McDaniel didn't seem to have the type of demeanor to really lead a locker room. Dolphins fans now, I think, are jaded. After this specific news, it's like they're the Joker, laughing to themselves in the corner, like, we're the Miami Dolphins, the joke's on me, and we are who we are. I think Dolphins fans are going to kind of meme watch next year. They know they're going to be bad. I think they are lightly excited about the potential of Malik Willis. But, I think that could be a bright spot if they're going to take any nugget, like a gold nugget out of the shit, so to speak. they do have a quarterback who has shown potential in real NFL time, real NFL games. And, maybe because they have nothing to lose next year and their roster's so bad that they could be a little frisky in certain games. I'm not saying they're going to win a lot of games. Certainly not that. They're going to be probably the worst team in the NFL. But they could put up some surprising fight, and they probably won't roll over necessarily just because they're the Dolphins. Now, maybe their team gets decimated by injury. I don't know. But if I'm a Dolphins fan, I'm upset. But like the earlier comments about John Calipari and the separation from the University of Kentucky's basketball program, this needed to happen. McDaniel actually did a little bit better toward the end of last year because we all thought the Dolphins were one of the worst teams in the NFL the entire year. He kind of fought back towards the latter part of the season and gained some credibility and respectability back on his reputation. But it still wasn't enough to save his job. And I know this for a fact, and this has less to do with Mike McDaniel, who I think the Dolphins fans low-key liked, but they just didn't think it was going to work out. And I think Dolphins fans really, really, really wanted to move on from Tua. They knew the limitations of Tua. He was not that guy. And his best case scenario is like a less dynamic Drew Brees. And I don't mean to say he's like Drew Brees, but he has to hit all of his throws. He's going to be super efficient. He's picking you apart, but he's just not that kind of guy, and he's also injury prone. And he's low-key a little bit of a distraction, and I don't know if I don't know if the locker room really rallied around Tua. So when you're stuck in that quarterback kind of situation, and you know that the coach needs a different quarterback in order to maximize what the coach is able to do, you're stuck in this weird like purgatory where you're in F1, but you got like a monkey driving the car, I guess, and it's not going to work out. So I think that's kind of what Dolphins fans were experiencing the past couple of years, and ultimately why it didn't work out, and they got kind of jaded and apathetic, and I think that's going to continue going forward. The other thing I want to mention about the Dolphins really quick, and you're talking about cap space and franchise hell, and this is why I am not bullish, I'm bearish on the Dolphins going forward, is not to make it one of these kind of conversations again, but I will say it. 2 words, Stephen Ross. He is a terrible owner. The Dolphins make horrific financial decisions under him, and he spends the money. While, yes, he has, his GMs and people who make the decisions and blah, 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 that's how it goes. Stephen Ross is a bad owner, and he puts his thumb on the scale. And the Dolphins fans know that. And as long as he is in the mix in Miami, they're going to have to be content at just marginally being better than the Jets as a franchise.
I mean, at this point, I don't even know. They might be at the same damn level at this point. How horrific is it that to think, as a Dolphins fan, you could have had Drew Brees at one point, and your doctor said no.
He's sick to my stomach every single day.
Yeah. And it just sucks because I think the main person I feel sorry for is Malik Willis. And he's, he got paid all that money. I'm talking about, I'm pretty sure when he came in, he was not informed or was not told that he was getting rid of his best weapon on the offense in terms of receiver. And I think he does have talent. I think you can make the argument that, depending on the game with Green Bay, Malik Willis seemed to get the offense moving a little bit better than Love did. But I just hope he doesn't get sent there basically as a sacrifice, and then they get the one overall pick, and they're like, a Manning. I think we want him. We're going to let him sit for a year and let Malik Willis die. But you know what? Shout out to Atlanta Falcons for bringing in Tua. Between him and Penix, there's going to be 2 new statues outside of Atlanta Memorial Hospital. What a wild-ass quarterback room. Love it. Yeah, sucks to be a Dolphins fan. I'm sorry, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. So you're at the very bottom of hell. So I figured, hey, would you like to nominate somebody for one of the layers of hell or whatever you want to, picture? I'd say the Miami Dolphins, like the house is on fire. Maybe some other teams I might mention. It's not on fire, but there's definitely a kitchen fire. There's a grease fire or something. But I was going to say, I'll let you do the nomination unless you really want me to go back to back here.
So if the 9 circles of hell are, according to Dante, who wrote Dante's Inferno, if the last circle of hell is treachery, the betrayal of trust, and the Dolphins are in the
I like how you
the
pulled
treachery tier, so to speak.
They're traitors to their fandoms, to their fans.
The Dolphins are in the frozen lake with Satan, Judas Iscariot, Brutus, and Cassius. That's where the Miami Dolphins are. Now, maybe, there's 8 other tiers here. We have fraud, violence, hearsay.
My goal is not to do every layer of this. I was not thinking that.
Yeah. But maybe go in with the greed or indulgence at a 4 to 5. If this is like a 1 to 9 scale, maybe you can even say gluttony because it's not as bad as people may think at first glance. But I would say this is a kind of purgatory that you don't want to be stuck in. It is the Carolina Panthers, Logan's neighboring team down there. So the Carolina Panthers famously, or even famously, made the playoffs last year. They won the NFC South, which is not an accomplishment. But they went, I believe, 8-9 to finish off the season, and then gave the Rams, who went to the NFC Championship, quite a scare there in the wild card weekend. The Rams were clearly the better team, but the Panthers played really well, and they gave them a run for their money. And I think if you're a Panthers fan, you're very happy with how that finished up. Decent season. Gave you a little something to root for. You were in it at the end. You gave a good team, you gave them a good scare. Now, moving into the offseason, you got to take the blinders off because this team is stuck in a way that I do not envy, specifically around the contractual situation of their quarterback. Bryce Young, number 1 overall pick a few years ago. What was that, 2023, if I'm not mistaken? So this quarterback class ended up being not very good. Let's just say that. I mean, Bryce Young is all right, and C.J. Stroud is all right. Will Levis is a clown, and Anthony Richardson is one of the worst quarterback busts in NFL history. So if those are your top 4 quarterbacks, it's not, you can't be all right as a number 1 overall pick. Now, if you linger around in the league as long as like a player like Alex Smith had, you can end up taking that at number 1 overall. But I would argue that if Aaron Rodgers is still on the board and he becomes one of the best quarterbacks ever, that's who you take number 1. So regardless, Bryce Young goes number 1. He won a national championship at Alabama. He won a Heisman Trophy. But questions about his size, his, playmaking ability, all of those things followed him from Alabama to the NFL. I think during that period of time, and you could maybe add to this, is people kind of universally viewed him as the number 1 overall pick. I don't think everybody was like, yay, Bryce Young, but I feel like he just got penciled in to that because the other quarterbacks behind him were a little, they're not as good as Bryce. Anthony Richardson's got a lot of question marks, and C.J. Stroud is good, but is he better than Bryce Young? I don't know. So the Panthers didn't they trade with the Bears to get that pick? Okay, they made that massive trade with Chicago, move up, take Bryce Young. So they sold the future of the franchise to get this guy. And it has not worked out very well. Last year was the best year of Bryce Young's career, but he was not good enough to warrant a unanimous vote of confidence for getting a big long-term second contract. Let me ask you this question. Rapid react. Who's had the better career after 3 years of their career? Who had a better career, Kyler Murray or Bryce Young?
Kyler Murray.
Exactly. And I wouldn't even blink. You didn't blink. Kyler Murray had the better career. Kyler Murray is a much better football player than Bryce Young, in my opinion. Kyler Murray has got a maximum deal with the Arizona Cardinals. He completely flamed out, and now he is playing in Minnesota. What does that tell you? Well, Bryce Young, and by the way, I don't think their demeanors are the same. I'm just talking about like skill for skill. Bryce Young is going to have to, next year, he is going to have to play out of his mind. And I don't mean like the Panthers make the playoffs and, maybe they go like 10-7. I mean, he's going to have to throw for like 4,000 yards, 35 touchdowns, 7 picks, and run for 500 yards and have 5 rushing touchdowns and have really good efficiency numbers in order for the Carolina Panthers to dole out a massive extension for him. So, how do you move forward in the NFL if you're not sure whether or not to commit to your current quarterback? Well, that's what they're staring down the barrel of right now. So, if you want Bryce Young to really have a massive next season, you got to surround him with the right players. You got to have good skill players, Well, let's go ahead and look at who Carolina has at their skill player positions. Start off in the running backs. Chuba Hubbard, fine. Not really doing a lot for me. Jonathan Brooks, Travis Etienne's brother. They signed A.J. Dillon, who's kind of at the back end of his career here. Not a lot going on in the running back room. Probably a little underrated, but Rico Dowdle is not there anymore, and he really was pretty good for them. Let's go over to wide receivers. Tet McMillan, good player, won Rookie of the Year. I don't know how... Tet McMillan doesn't scream to me top 10 receiver in the league potential. Like, he just doesn't. I don't think he's that kind of player. I think he's a good, not great player. Xavier Legette, draft bust. Jalen Coker, Jimmy Horn, John Mechie, David Moore, role players. Okay, so they have nobody. Now, they could address this in the draft, potentially. I'm not going to hate too much. Obviously, there's still some offseason moves to make, but maybe the tight end position will salvage it. Well, we have Tommy Trimble, Jatavion Sanders, Mitchell Evans, James Mitchell. Again, not a whole lot of anything there. Okay, well, what do we do? We're Carolina. Our defense is all right. Carolina last year, offensively, 27th in points per game, 27th in total yards per game. This is according to PFF, by the way, 26th in total passing yards, 25th in third down conversion. So they were among the worst in the league in all of these key offensive metrics. That does not bode well for Bryce's contractual future. Their defense was not great. It does have some talent. It does have a little bit of talent, namely, I believe, Derek Brown. But other than that, I mean, they also did sign Devin Lloyd and Jalen Phillips, so I'll give them that. But they made some moves on defense. They have J.C. Horn. He's a pretty good player. But, their defense is below average to having some potential to being better. Not a very impressive team. Now, we're talking about cap situation here, okay? Carolina Panthers cap situation is also not very good. Okay, so at the moment, the Carolina Panthers have they have negative, like around $630,000 in cap space. Dead money, not too bad. They have about $20 million in dead money, and then active cap spending, they're at $287 million. They do not have a lot of cap space left here. No, actually, their effective cap space, they're in the negative. Excuse me. Their active or cap space is $4.2 million. So that's how much they have left. So that's really, you mentioned the Dolphins earlier. They have 2.1. I mean, they effectively have nothing. These are, you sign around the edges kind of guys. These are not superstars. These are old veterans who are, looking to, maybe get one more contract year. These are fringe players in the league. That's how much you can sign for that. Those are the kind of players you can sign. So with that cap situation, with their quarterback situation. And then, I know we're talking owners here, so I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. David Tepper, also a terrible owner. I mean, I don't know where they find these guys, but he's also a terrible owner. And since he's owned the Carolina Panthers, I think they've disgraced themselves in many ways, and I think the fans would feel the same way. Not about the fan base, not about the team on the field, not about Dave Canales, the head coach, who I think is decent. You know, the Carolina Panthers do have some bright spots. I just think because of their cap and quarterback situation, their timeline is a little bit accelerated here. They're almost like they're a team that's like a year away from being a year away, but they've had to push up their timeline because of the Bryce Young thing. And I think ultimately they will move on from him. What the Carolina Panthers, I think, are doing right now is they are building out the rest of their roster. We'll see how this draft goes, but they want to get their defense good enough and maybe get some more decent role players in the skill positions, just good enough to be an attractive situation for another quarterback to come in after they ultimately trade Bryce Young for like a third-round draft pick. That's kind of what they're setting up for. So maybe there is a light at the end of the tunnel here, but currently I think Carolina is in kind of this bind that is unique to specifically them. It's a classic NFL situation. A lot of teams go through this. The Houston Texans, who are in a better situation than Carolina, are going to have to have these conversations also. But the Houston Texans have an amazing defense, and they've made the playoffs the past couple of years. Carolina made the playoffs last year, but I don't think it's as legitimate as Houston making the playoffs. So those are my 2 cents on the David Tepper Carolina Panthers, Bryce Young, their cap situation. What do you think? Does that qualify them to be in like the 4th or 5th layer of hell here?
I would agree. You know, they're in the middle layers there. It's part of what's difficult about the Panthers, and you mentioned the cap space, about $5 million, is that they have a lot of guys that need to get paid next year. So they're going all in this year. They're paying all these guys, and they're trying to give Bryce as much help as they can, especially on that offensive line. And I'm sure that they'll get another receiving threat potentially through the draft, whether that's tight end like you had mentioned, or just, Jalen Coker's been phenomenal for him after he came back from injury. Leggett has been a little disappointing for being a first-round draft pick. And Tet looks everything that he should be coming out of college. That one doesn't surprise me. But in terms of, they have to pay their franchise left tackle, Akeem Ekwonu. He's up to be paid. They just traded for Rasheed Walker from the Packers, who is a tackle. They got to pay him. This is a 1-year kind of deal for him. And some of the other guys, they probably will have to do some restructuring. But like Derek Brown, their star defensive tackles due $31 million next year. Jalen Phillips is due $32 million. Their right tackle, Taylor Morton, due $28 million. And I'm sure we can cut some or trade some, whatever it might be. But they have. My point is that they're going to have some guys that's got to get paid next year. And so I think what they're trying to do is load it up. Let's see what Bryce can do, and this will be our decision maker right here. Because if he doesn't have the season where we think he's showing franchise potential, then we need to make a move. We need to either keep some of these other guys and let Bryce just kind of play out on his 4th year, and then we'll let him walk, or you're keeping Bryce, and then you got to pick and choose who you're keeping. So this is a stacked deck that Carolina's going to get for a while. Is it possible that they could definitely make a push? Yeah, depending on their division and how it looks. The Saints are still kind of still also in a rebuild. I feel like Tampa Bay is just kind of in this. The wheels are turning in the mud after Tom Brady had left. And I'm not saying that because of Baker. I'm just saying the roster itself has just lost some pieces, and some guys have been hurt, and, they're trying to put it back together. And then the Falcons just fuck the Falcons. They'll never be able to figure it out after blowing that Super Bowl. They're just cursed. I don't know what's going to break it, but they're cursed. So yeah, I'd agree. Mid-level hell, where you're like, hey, this is the pinnacle. You're about to find out real quick if you're about to go into a deeper layer or if you're going to come out top and, I don't even want to say purgatory. Maybe this is a chance for you to get out of hell. But this is a very hopeful Bryce Young take if that were to happen. No, I agree. China's just, they got some really good pieces. It's just, let's say it's a sports car and you got a four-cylinder in it and not a V8. So that's where it's at. Let's just say we're sticking with the layers of hell. So they're saying like the first layer is limbo, second layer is lust, and I think this is a team. Maybe they're not in hell yet that you could argue, but I think they're on their way in. I think they're already there, and that is the Buffalo Bills. And you're probably like, whoa, Logan, they're a super good team. They're always in competition. And I'm like, listen, I'm going in. So they got $13 million in cap space. They've ever since they paid Josh Allen, they've had a tight wallet, and then that's what happens when you pay a quarterback that type of money. And Josh Allen's contract isn't too bad coming in to this season. It's $44 million, which is considerably lower than several other quarterbacks who are of lesser talent than Josh Allen, in my opinion. Trevor Lawrence, and they're coming in. For one first-round draft pick, the 26th. They don't have a second. They have a third at the 91 spot, a fourth, a fifth, an additional fifth from the Bears, a sixth, and 2 sevenths. So I wouldn't say anything in the draft's going to be spectacular or changing. My main point that I wanted to bring on the Bills isn't necessarily the lack of talent. It's your god-awful GM and how poor spending has led to this roster inflexibility for the past 3 to 4 seasons. You want to know why you can't get over the hump? Because you are mispaying the players that you're bringing in, or you're hoping, oh, Von Miller, please, still have something in the tank, and you give Von Miller a fucking 5-year contract when he's 33 years old. I don't care when you can cut him. There's still dead cap involved with it. That is a stupid contract. And then what do you do after, all right, we've learned from Von Miller. Let's go sign Joey Bosa, who is definitely not at the same age or near it and doesn't get hurt as often. Yeah, guess what? On the same rodeo. So I'm going to pull up the individual cap here, just in terms of, the dead caps. Some of these aren't bad, but hey, Matt Milano, longtime player, older veteran, $11 million. Teron Johnson, you trade him. I don't know what the hell you got back from him because it definitely wasn't picks at this point. I can't remember what was involved in the trade. $9.5 million. Joey Bosa. Oh, we're going to get rid of him. $7 million. You voided Connor McGovern. $5 million. I'm going to assume because it's not a restructure because you gave him a new contract and then you paid him on top of the void. So you practically, let's see what his you're paying him a little over $5 million and his dead cap was like $4.5 million. So you've essentially doubled the money that you owe him because you couldn't, I don't know, just re-sign him or give him a structure. I don't understand that. But one of the main points that I want to bring up the Bills, and this is my greatest point, and I mentioned this to you before we started talking. The highest paid wide receiver on the Buffalo Bills is Josh Palmer, who's making just under $12 million. Okay, he is the 5th highest paid player on this roster. I want you to tell me a single Josh Palmer highlight that you can think that has ever occurred with him in a Bills uniform. I can't think of one.
I can't think of one either.
Some of the other guys that they're paying, obviously I mentioned Josh Allen, deserved money. Deion Dawkins, top 3, top 5 left tackle in the league. You're going to have to pay one of those guys. That's fine. Ed Oliver, you're paying him a little over $13.5 million. He played 3 games last year. All right, he's had health issues forever. And even when he's been healthy, you cannot tell me that he is a premier defensive tackle. Okay, you paid him that money because you're trying to keep the roster together. You have Greg Rousseau, a 26-year-old, paying him almost $12 million. He made, I believe, 24 tackles and 7 sacks last season. Is that worth that type of money? I don't know. It could be a worse contract, but he's your lead edge rusher at this point, and that's the production you're getting out of it. Okay, Dawson Knox, 30-year-old tight end that is not the number one tight end on your roster. You're paying him $8.5 million. Why? What kind of contract did you give him to feel like you can't get rid of him? Because even when your other tight end, who I'm having brain fart now, it's not Jackson. They do have Jackson Hawes, but that's not it. Dalton Kincaid, even though he gets hurt, I feel like Dawson Knox is more hurt than he is. Why is he on the roster? Why did you extend him? And then I like the DJ Moore trade that you made. You're only paying him a little under $7 million. Basically Chicago ate that dead cap for you. So that was probably the best move that you made in the past 2 to 3 years in terms of a transaction. It's just, Ellen, the James Cook money doesn't even take into effect yet. That takes into effect, I believe, next year. So you're only paying him a little above $5 million. That number's going to skyrocket because you gave him his big contract, which he's due for it. It's just how many players, or the fact that they have tried to hold this defense together with all their veterans, like previous years, like, there's Pryor, there's, Matt Milana they had mentioned, the one cornerback that I can never remember that was super, super good that also played for New England. They've just, I feel like they're like, all right, the window's here, and they just keep shoveling money. And what's happened is that this roster has aged considerably, and now a lot of those guys are out of the door. The only problem is that with the age, that this roster being aged, and they just have not been able to replace what they have lost in the past 2 to 3 seasons. And the money that they dish out hoping to get one guy in there or two guys in there to give them that burst. Oh, we're bringing in Von Miller. We're bringing in Joey Bosa. Those guys aren't available to even play or make an impact. So you're just throwing money when you could potentially, maybe get more depth behind the guys that may get injured just to hold the wagon together. Or maybe instead of paying this guy, maybe you restructure a couple deals, pay a younger guy who's going to be more available for you. And what you're seeing now is, hey, we saw it last year in the playoffs. Josh Allen's playing hero ball, making stupid mistakes, and when he feels like he has to have pressure on him to make a move, he becomes one of the most impressive quarterbacks to watch, to where I'm watching Daniel Jones 2.0. I'm watching just horrendous playmaking decisions, especially generation of turnovers. Look up his playoff stats. It's awful. He's never led the NFL once in terms of, let's say, passing yards for how good he is. He's, in terms of efficiency, I don't think he's been top 5 any season. And this is me just slam dunking Josh Allen at this point, even though I think he's a phenomenal player. It's just that, and then you have this battle between your head coach and your GM, and your owner looks like a fool during all of this, and your GM is the one that wins the battle, and they decide, we're going to keep the offensive coordinator from the same regime that we just placed all the blame on. It makes no sense. Welcome back to hell, Buffalo. You may not be there yet, but the heat is coming. The flames are outside the door to your house. Your gas line has a leak, and you're going out for a smoke next season, okay? I'm warning you now. It's like, hey, Patriots are not going away. You're lucky because the rest of your division is shit, but we've just seen a changing of the guard in the AFC. Jacksonville's not going away. Denver's not going away. Houston's not going away. Who knows what Indy's going to do? I think they're still going to be competitive. Who knows what the Chargers, I still think the Chargers are going to be competitive, getting their offensive line back. Kansas City, they're still a threat. Baltimore, still a threat. Cincinnati, still a threat. I'm sitting here and I'm looking at all these teams and the talent of the roster, and out of all those teams listed, I can't tell you for sure that I would take Buffalo's talent overall over any of them. And now it's going to be Josh Allen hero ball, where I have seen him fail more often than not against other teams, especially in playoff time. So, hey, maybe I'm off my rocker and I'm taking a deep take here, but I'm gonna say that I think Buffalo is going to have a regression, and they're going to have a giant hole that they're going to have to climb out of if they want to be a contender again. I still think they are playoff worthy because of what Josh Allen can do and the weapons on that offense, but I am not impressed with that defense. I don't care who they brought in. I think Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is washed at this point. It's the wheels are spinning. You're trying to get it to go. It's not moving because you didn't change the right part out on the car. Something else was broken and you decided to, it's like, the alternator's broke, but I'm going to get these cool seat covers now, and then we'll figure it out later. I'm not too excited for Buffalo in the coming years because I think the window, you can make it's still open. I think the window's shut. You missed it. You missed it because we saw it this year. All these other teams are jumping in. Their windows are open. Yours is closed unless you you draft your ass off, and after a year or two, you're able to settle the books and really get some smart, payments, or you make some smart contract signings. I just think it's closed. You're at that point at least with Cincinnati. Shit, Joe Burrow gets hurt, and they have some mid-tier draft picks that can kind of restock your roster. Buffalo is in this perpetual drafting, 24 picks and back, where they're not getting that super, mega talented guy. They got to hit on their first round draft pick because at the end of the first round, it's not a guarantee it's going to hit. So yeah, I don't know what your take on that is. Maybe I'm going wild, but I'm not excited for Buffalo. I think Bills fans need to be welcoming to the first layer of hell, which is limbo, and your second layer of hell, which is lust. You lusted after some star players past their prime, and it sunk the ship, and now you guys don't have a paddle. What are you going to do?
I think you're probably right to put them, say, in the first level of hell, maybe even the second level. I think in terms of the exercise, that feels right to me. I'm a little less bearish on Buffalo's prospects going forward. I think they may be I think I've said this before. I think they may be over the hill a little bit in terms of future viability, but I don't think their window is closed unless you're specifically talking about winning a Super Bowl.
Super Bowl, that's what I'm saying. They're still going to be in the playoffs. They're going to be competitive, but I'm like, you know what? The Patriots got a brighter future than you right now.
I think a lot of this comes down to what I will call a lesser Kansas City situation as to, first, the Buffalo Bills have 2 nothing teams in their division, like total nothing backwater teams.
I just think Kansas City is like the one step ahead. They're at the part where they're just stripping the parts out. They're like, all right, we got to do this mini rebuild. Buffalo's still hanging on. They're a year or two away from stripping the parts out.
I agree. I think I that's why I said lesser. I do. Yeah. I do understand the kind of the differences and Kansas City is not in a great cap situation either. But I would say that if Kansas City had like a skin, something on their skin, like a mole or something, they're cutting that off, right now, trying to get Mahomes healthy, keep the locker room, viable, whatever. Even though they did lose some players in free agency. Now, Buffalo, I understand that they're still having their window, not in terms of a Josh Allen championship. That's not what you're saying, but the defense, important key positions, they've not adequately addressed those enough to help their financial situation going forward. I'd say, bringing it back to kind of my point, though, is that Buffalo's got 2 nothing teams in their division. They could hypothetically go 4-0 against them, and then it's how real is New England? How close are those teams? I think they're still kind of on a similar level. We'll have to see the progression of Drake May. I think Josh Allen is an overwhelming talent, even though he can have some kind of mishaps at quarterback from time to time. Yes. I've excoriated the Bills in the past for their ownership, for their treatment of former head coach Sean McDermott. With all that being said, I'm still kind of leaning toward, if Buffalo is able to make the playoffs, they will still have a puncher's chance of maybe not winning the Super Bowl. I would say probably going to an AFC Championship game and potentially going to the Super Bowl if they have they right. And I'm saying this is probably over the next 2 years too. Who knows how this progresses and how league dynamics change. That's why I kind of compared them to Kansas City in that Kansas City, while I don't think they're the world beaters they were, I don't think that 15-1 season was very legitimate. I think it was very fraudulent, maybe the worst 15-1 season of all time. But I still feel like Kansas City is a little bit ahead of Buffalo. But if you have that kind of quarterback, you still have a puncher's chance to at least make your conference championship game if you're good enough during the season. Now, who knows how the loss of former head coach Sean McDermott will impact that team. I'm still waiting to see how the Joe Brady experience will play out there. But ultimately, I wouldn't say their window is completely closed, but I think it's got a little crack open, but the door is shutting. And that's kind of what I mean when they're over the hill. Buffalo,
I'll go even further. I don't think Josh Allen makes it to an AFC Championship game the next 2 years.
I don't think that's irrational or anything. I don't know if I'm gonna die on that hill of Buffalo can't do this or that, but
I'm doing it.
I just mean to contrast your point. I'm not as out on them as you are, but I'm probably a little less farther along in that kind of thought cycle, I guess. Buffalo is kind of similar, though. I feel like the way I'm talking about Buffalo is the way I talk about Cincinnati, and we brought up, and I'm not going to make a big whole Bengals thing here, but I will say this, is that, it's the age-old adage of, in the NFL, if you have an elite quarterback, you're still going to be in the mix. It's why the Bengals have had 2 straight seasons of mediocrity and 1 season of just being objectively bad for the most part. And people still are kind of even me. Cincinnati, if things break right, I don't know, could they not win the Super Bowl, but maybe they could win their division and maybe they could do this or that. And I still think Buffalo is kind of in that mix, but we still do. You can throw the Ravens in here too, honestly. We still kind of default to that core group of the 4 teams, the Bengals, the Ravens, maybe a little less the Bengals, but the Chiefs, the Bills, they're all kind of in that mix, and you feel like you could still pencil them in to being a competitive Super Bowl caliber team, and that may not be the case anymore. So I think it is accurate to put them in the first layer of hell. I'm just not as out on them as a team as you may be.
Listen, just a bold take. I know a lot of people like Josh Allen, and he is an uber.
They bake cakes.
Yeah, I'm trying to bake. Oh, Jesus Christ, I'm trying to bake the fattest cake I can here. Watch, we're going to revisit this. I'm going to keep this in the back of my mind when we're doing this another episode in about, 9 months from now, when we see Josh Allen crying on the sideline because he lost to, the Tennessee Titans in the wild card round. That'd be fun. Now that is an insane take. I won't go that far, but yeah, that's just what I feel about the Bills, and to an extension, I feel that way a little bit more about. I feel less. It's in the same realm with Cincinnati, but I can at least sit here and say Joe's at least got the weapons that and trust. Even Josh Allen doesn't even have that. So I would say, honestly, if you're asking me how I feel about it, I feel like I'm a little bit more positive on the Bengals coming in this year, potentially with their draft, than I am with the Bills, to be honest.
I am too, actually. I think if there's a lot of caveats with Cincinnati, but if they're able to hit on the players in the draft and they're able to get some improvement from the guys they drafted last year and their free agent signings work out, maybe they get like one more dude. I think the Bengals could be back to respectability because even with a depleted roster, they've been relatively competitive. Absent their quarterback, they've had some really embarrassing games, but I think you know I would agree that they're a little bit ahead of Buffalo. Also, really quick, I'm not going to change it from the football conversation, but Kentucky is over. They're already down by 15.
Oh.
So it is about 10 minutes left in the second half. So, hey, guys, everything I said, not about the spirit of Kentucky basketball, but about Mark Pope and the fan base, what I would tell you is that now, and I'm live reacting to this, so barring a Kentucky comeback, you will see on Twitter, fans are going to be calling for Mark Pope to be fired. Yeah, I mean, that is a virtual guarantee. And I know I had all that spiel earlier. That was contingent on, and I mean everything I said about the Calipari stuff, by the way, but that was contingent on Kentucky potentially winning this game, maybe making the Sweet 16, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's looking that's looking less likely. Iowa State has one of their best players. He's hurt, so they're just better than Kentucky. This Kentucky team's exceptionally flawed, but if you're gonna go, pick it outside of Mark Pope's house, I would say get your pitchforks ready. I'm not a part of that crowd, but there certainly will be UK fans on social media advocating for that.
Yeah, you know what? I hope it's hilarious. I hope this ain't gonna happen. But if Kentucky does come back and wins, then you got to be like, all right, I got to eat my words again for this. I think you're safe.
Just hit another three.
Yeah, I think you're safe. I got the score pulled up over here on this side. I'm like, yeah, that'd be pretty incredible for Pope to pull this off. Iowa State's a good team.
Yeah, I don't hate Iowa State. And that's the thing about college basketball. It's like, as a UK fan, I do want UK to be in the mix every year. I want them to be one of the best teams in college basketball. They at least like a top 15 team. I'd be pretty content competing for championships, but I'm not going to get all upset about losing to Iowa State. The fact of the matter is Kentucky's got a lot more competition in college basketball, and they are going to have to really figure out how to best build a roster that can compete at the current level without overpaying for players. And they have to give Mark Pope a GM. They need a real person making the roster and not the coach just going out there and throwing a bag of money at whoever number 1, 2, 3 guy is in the transfer portal. And that's just what it comes down to. So until that happens, the best programs, i.e. Duke, John Shire, University of Connecticut with Dan Hurley, so to a lesser extent, some of those SEC teams. Maybe Florida you could throw in that upper tier mix. I think with Todd Golden there, Florida's really been quite impressive, and I think they're going to be good going forward for a while. But they're going to have to learn to compete at that level, and they're going to have to really figure out their roster building techniques. March is it's such an interesting time. We're sitting here talking about, football, and football yields, I think, the best off-season conversations. It's the most fun sport to talk about in terms of off-season stuff because the league is so deep and there's so many ways you can take it. The NBA, lesser. That's just become lesser, in my opinion. You could have had a lot of off-season fodder in the past, but when March rolls around, you got college basketball. You got baseball opening day. This year we had the World Baseball Classic, if you're into that. And now we have March Madness and the NFL Draft approaching. I mean, it's a good sports time here in the good old US of A. Oh, yeah, and I guess you also have NBA, but, we're not watching that right now.
Nah, college basketball time, NFL, off-season time. We'll switch NBA gears once March Madness is over.
Hey, okay, let's finish on this. Did we comment? Did we talk about the Bam Adebayo 83-point game last week?
I don't think we did, to be
Okay.
honest with you.
All right.
If we did, we might have we might have just mentioned it, but we didn't go in depth of it.
Okay. All right. Here, I'll tee it up. You go first, and then I'll follow. Gut feeling, and here's some preamble, really quick, folks. The Miami Heat's Bam Adebayo officially, I think last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, he became he essentially beat Kobe Bryant's modern NBA record for points in a game. Now, Wilt Chamberlain holds the ultimate record at 100 points in the game, but Kobe Bryant in 2006, the late Kobe Bryant, scored 81 points in a game against the Toronto Raptors. And the other day, against the Washington Wizards, the lowly Wizards, the Heat's Bam Adebayo scored 83 points in an NBA game, officially beating Kobe Bryant's modern record. Okay, with all of that preamble, how do you feel about it?
I mean, don't be wrong, 83 is 83. However, if you watched a 60-second reel of that game, his teammates were feeding him the ball. Washington was not shy about fouling him. Which is really weird. You know, I would expect his teammates to be helping him, trying. Oh, look, he's already on track. Keep feeding him. But if I was on the opposing team, I think as a coach or as a player, I'm like, we're gonna make sure this guy doesn't score another point because I do not want to be on the team that puts up 83 points or gives up the most points ever scored on a televised game. I think that's the best way I can word that. But it's Kobe's 81 is more impressive. That's what I'll say. 83 is higher. Kobe's 81 is more impressive. I think that's my synopsis, quick take of it.
I think that his 83-point game is good in the current context of the NBA. When I say good, I mean it's cool. Respect to him. He's a good player.
40 free throws attempts?
But, well, yes. Essentially, I think it's bogus. I think as someone who likes the ethics of basketball, and I don't mean like unwritten rules, I mean like you were saying. It's why people don't like James Harden very much. The guy just foul baits, and he is a great player, but like he's just jumping into people and shooting a bunch of free throws, and that's how he gets a lot of his scoring totals, you know, padding that. Same thing with Bam Adebayo.
Same thing with SGA.
Yeah, he's kind of the modern version of that. There is a contingency of people on NBA YouTube, NBA Twitter, who are less than enthusiastic that Bam Adebayo broke Kobe Bryant's record. I would say that Bam was definitely chasing it at the end of that game. I think the Washington Wizards were kind of letting it. They were a bad team. They were letting it happen. His teammates were just feeding him the fouls and the free throws. All of that just makes for really embarrassing. Here, you know what? Honestly, this is what I would compare it to. If somebody was in a home run, say the franchise record. I don't know if this is true or not. I'm just making this up. If the Baltimore Orioles franchise record for home runs in a season was like 50, okay? And there's a guy on the Orioles who has 50 home runs, and it's like the second to last game of the season or something. It feels like this 83-point game from Bam feels like the equivalent of the opposing pitcher throwing like a complete meatball like right down the middle.
Yeah, like underhand tossing it.
Yeah, like just underhand tossing it so he could just launch it out of the park and beat the record. Like that's what this kind of feels like to me. And with that being said, that's why I think it's bad for the game of basketball. I think this is a cool performance, but I also think that Kobe's 81-point game will be more memorable than this one. And whenever this 83-point game comes up, it will always be linked to the 81-point game. And whenever people talk about the 81-point game or the 83-point game, you're not going to be able to talk with one about the other. So, but I think in the context in which people talk about Bam's game is always going to be negative. They'll be like, hey, Kobe got 81 points. And the response will be like, oh, Bam got 83. And then the response will be, well, that's fraudulent because of X, Y, Z reason. And that's the way I think it'll go. So ultimately, ethically, I think it's bad for the game of basketball. And while it's cool and hard to do, I'm not like, it's a flash in the pan. And the other thing that's completely weird about this is Bam like averages like I think less than 20 points per game on his career. Like he's not some crazy scorer. So the idea that he would be the guy to do this also just lessens the aura around it. You would think it would be the opposite. Like you would think that, oh, this guy just came out of nowhere that doesn't score a bunch and, you know, broke the record. But the way they went about it and I think it's just.
I mean, you're not wrong. I would say, yes, this is a moment, a badge that kind of shows a little bit of a representation of the modern NBA, which you compare it to, you know, Kobe's 81 or that era, totally different. Way more, in my eyes, way more watchable with not just the 81 versus 83, but just the era in general. And you're right, in terms of the player, it's like, you know, Bam is a very good player. He's an all-star, but I'm like, oh, a good game for Bam, 30 points, 40 points, you know, double-double, that kind of thing. You know, if you were telling me, oh, somebody broke Kobe's record, I'm like, was it Kevin Durant? Was it, you know, like, did Wemby do it? You know, somebody who is like generational to a degree, and it's like Bam. I'm like, if you put a super team together and have Bam on it, Bam's going to be the number 2 or 3 option on it, no matter who you got on the damn roster. You know, that's not me. I'm not trying to downplay Bam because I like him as a player. I think he's really good, but he's just not who you're like, oh, the scoring machine, the guy that just catches on fire and it's just like, all right, this dude hit 12 threes in, you know, the first half. Like, that's not Bam. Like, that would be some Steph Curry shit that I would imagine where it's like, oh, Steph Curry broke 83. And I was like, he hit 23s? Like, what's going, you know, it just doesn't match. You're 100% right. It's a great call. Like, it does not match the profile of the player to break it. And it should have been, it would have been a better, let's just say, badge for the league if it was somebody that had a higher repertoire or a more of a face of the league.
I have two things there. One is that it feels kind of trivia question-y. Like the whole thing around this is like a game of bar trivia. Who scored 83 points in the 2005-2026 season beating Kobe Bryant? Like Bam Adebayo. It's like sports heads would know that, but, you know, your general, you know, sports fan probably, you know, maybe wouldn't. Now, the other thing, and I think you were kind of touching on this, and this is why I think this is an important conversation, and we've talked about this in the past. I had a big, long spiel on it, is that the reaction on social media to this 83-point game, which should be a positive celebration of the game of NBA basketball, has instead been a nonstop fest of critiques, criticism, or just outright negativity or hostility toward the league, Bam Adebayo, or, you know, the Wizards, you know, the Heat, whatever, the game. It's like if a dude hit 6 home runs in a game and everybody's like, well, pitching sucks now and it's just not as cool. You know, it would be like that. And so I think the conversation around this specific moment in time is a perfect encapsulation of the overall fan sentiment around NBA basketball right now. when the World Baseball Classic happens last week, and even Team USA loses to Venezuela, who was a great team, I think the baseball fan reaction, unless you're just like an outright nationalist for America, the baseball fan reaction to the event was overall positivity. It was things are heading in the right direction. Even though I was rooting for Team USA, Venezuela is a great team, and all the dudes were really humble, and I'm really excited to watch these guys going into the season. That's what I was seeing on the internet. Okay, that was a big moment. In the NBA, a guy breaks, a late player's, for Kobe's record, 83-point game. Instead, it's just nonstop shitting on the league, shitting on the commissioner. That's how the fans feel. That's where the grassroots is. People like the basketball, they watch the product, but they're kind of in this like period of like, when is this going to change? We do not like how the game's playing out. These player podcasts are all over the place. They're making me dislike my favorite superstars. The guys feel money hungry and greedy. They're apathetic about the game. They do load management, all of this. Those are the general sentiments around the NBA. There is no like NBA cheerleader like there was 10 years ago, like leading the charge that the NBA is progressive and the stars are, the face of American sports. They're more popular than the NFL quarterbacks and baseball players and hockey players or even golfers or whatever. It's these guys we got to herald, and they kicked out Donald Sterling, and Adam Silver made a right move with that, and look at all the money the league's making, and look how many followers we have on TikTok. And then 10 years later, whatever, here we are, and their fans just could not be, and content creator community could not be more openly hostile toward the league, its players, its product. These legacy guys like Kevin Durant, who we talked about the KD files. They're calling Steph Curry IDF Steph because of his investment portfolio. There's, general fatigue about LeBron and, the Bronny nepotism situation, how he deals with the Lakers and, his, sports agency and Rich Paul. And people are sick of all of this. And it's just this 83-point game just, opened the can lid on it a little bit and gave people another reason to go after the NBA and why it is it is not, the product is not satisfying the fans. So I think that is very, very interesting. And I think I said at the time a couple weeks ago when we talked about this, or like, the NBA, we had that pod. I think you said you thought baseball was firmly ahead of the NBA in the sports popularity rankings in the United States. Like, football is the undisputed number one. We obviously know this. So number two spot's up for grabs. And I think I pushed back on that, and I said I still think the NBA was number two, or if the baseball was number two, it's not as far as ahead as people may think. After seeing that, and the way the World Baseball Classic went down, I may be inclined to agree with that. Now, baseball could kick themselves in the gonads with the labor stoppage, and that is totally possible, people. The anger around that is going to be palpable, especially from legitimate baseball fans if that happens.
Yeah.
So, and it very well could happen. But at this moment in time, as of March 2026, I might have to agree with that, the baseball over basketball sentiment, because while casuals don't talk about it as much, or people may not know as many of the players, I think ultimately the game on the field has improved, and that's ultimately why you watch the sports. And the players are less, they make a lot of money, they are greedy, but I don't feel like the media around baseball is so outwardly hostile. Like, you don't have baseball content creators going like, fuck Aaron Judge, he's a piece of crap, he keeps tweeting at me and doing like that. That's not happening, and that is happening in the NBA. And people see all that drama, and they're like, "Yeah, dude, I'm good." Like, football, they're kind of an institution. They got their guardrails kind of up. There's certain things you can and can't do, and I think people all accept that. And football, people just like watching the game. Baseball, I think people are kind of returning to the game. for the reasons we listed. And then basketball is a sinking ship, and I just don't know how you change. Are you going to watch a 4-point line? I'm going to hate that. And I don't even feel like an old head or whatever, but like, and I don't want to be the guy like, oh, things were better back in my day, whatever, like 2006. I do think in some ways the game is too optimized. Now, there's too many nerds, and that's what happened to baseball. And I know I already did that rant, but, in many ways, the basketball players are as good as they've ever been as far as like talent and ability. But the game is as bad as it's been in decades. And when you smooth over all of the cracks, you're watching the same thing every single time. And all the teams play the same way because that's how you win games.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where they go from here without doing something like baseball did, where you change the dimensions of the field or the pace of how the game is played. And those are institutional changes. And I don't know what they do to change that. They are stuck, truly. And something has got to happen. I mean, they're talking about expansion, whatever. That's great. They are making a lot of money. But, man, I don't think they can afford to keep hemorrhaging fans like this.
Yeah, I mean, we did talk about it. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if it's a court thing. You change the size of it. Adding a 4-point shot sounds insane to me. That's not basketball at that point for me. And yeah, I agree with you. We sound like the old heads, but like shit, I was having a great time watching the Heat Mavericks final, and now I could give a shit less if I wanted to watch all 7 games. Or if it got to Game 7 or whatever it might be. I was, oh yeah, the finals are on. I'll catch it at some point. Back then I was like, oh, okay, put it on. Every single game because I was that interested in it at the time, and now I just don't care. And I feel like that is, I'm a fair representation for a casual NBA fan. That is the general feeling, is that it's just like, you don't care, catch it on Twitter, look at the ESPN, what's the stats? Oh, okay, I'll pay attention to playoffs, but then it's, there's just so many reasons why I said what I said a few weeks ago. I think baseball's on the comeback up. And maybe they're not number 2 right now, but they will be, because I don't see the NBA fixing this problem. Just don't.
The last point I want to make, and this is going to be quick, but you ever heard, I know people's parents have said this, or maybe you see it online, or a general sentiment coming from people who are older that they kind of like wish they were kids again, or they had like the stuff that kids have now, because the stuff kids are doing now is interesting or cooler than what they were doing, like and I just don't I don't think that's the case. Like, I do not think that is the case anymore. Like, I think I grew up in the right generation. I think things are only getting worse for video games, sports, social media, food, a lot. There's still some activities, you got to be a little creative about it. But as a kid, like this era of the NBA coming up in that we had LeBron, Kobe, Kevin Durant, we had Tim Duncan, we had all these, we had Shaq. Now they have just these guys, they're boring. And I don't hate any of these guys, but like, it's like Zion's with OnlyFans girls and all that. This is slop. I don't miss any of that. I mean, I can't be more glad that I'm 28 years old, because if I was a kid coming up here, like, I don't like, it was better in my day, but it legitimately was. It actually was. This is factual. This is factual.
Kobe Lakers and, Kevin Garnett Celtics. And, you still had rivalries. I brought that up a couple weeks ago. You still have that. You don't have that in this NBA. Those players don't, for the most part, 9 out of 10 of them don't give a shit. They're getting a paycheck to play basketball. And, shit, it could be your favorite player, and he's going to play on 8 different teams by the time he retires.
Right.
And you going to buy a jersey every single time? Probably not.
Right. And if they don't care, then I don't care. And I think that's the general sentiment. So if there's anything else you'd like to add, or I think we're going to close it out here, folks. I really like the NFL Hell segment. I thought that was pretty interesting. I also I need to read Dante's Inferno, but it's so hard. I watched a couple YouTube videos on it because I'm just kind of fascinated by those like old epic like poems. But it's so difficult to read. Not on some like some dumb shit. I mean, genuinely, like the prose in it and everything. They're tough. They're hard, but the concept in it of it is fascinating, and I thought that was a good segment.
I think that's something we could explore again in the future. Maybe we do a more detailed one where maybe we just kind of create our list of like, all right, 1 through 7, 1 through, is it 9 or 7? I can't even remember.
I like the layers. I thought
1 through 9,
3 to 4 was good because you it's like
gives you a little wiggle room.
Yeah, it's not so bad, generally bad, and then this is like horrible kind of thing. And I think we gave each a situation that hit every category or every level there right on the head.
That could definitely be a returning segment. It's basically, you got, if you split it up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean, that's 5 different teams to analyze there, or situations. Yeah, I just threw that out there. Thank you, Miami Dolphins, for inspiring that. I greatly appreciate your ineptitude. I cannot wait to see how much more you fuck this up this season. So I'm excited for you. You're going to get a Manning next year. It's going to be awesome. And then you're going to destroy him because I don't trust Miami to develop anybody.
Yeah. I hope they get Arch and they don't destroy him because I'm a big fan of his. But we'll see.
Yeah.
But with that being said, everybody, like, subscribe, share this with a friend. Let them know, word of mouth, whatever. I know we're not marketing gurus yet, but again, we are just chugging along. We're getting our reps in. And every week, I feel like we get better at this, generally. Every week, our arguments and our segments become more poignant, more succinct. You're getting, hopefully, acquainted with our personalities. So when we do start putting this out there, we really go for it. I think we're going to have a backlog of that. You'll always be able to revisit this kind of content playlist and be like, you could see us improve over time. And I think that's what we're kind of hoping to do with this right now. But if you're an OG listener, like, subscribe, comment, let us know. If you have our number, feel free to text us segment ideas. We are always open to experimenting with the content, so just let us know. But other than that, that's all I have to say. Sayonara. Logan, closing message.
Thank you, everybody, for taking some time out of your day to listen to us. We do greatly appreciate it. Feel free, send us ideas, either YouTube, text, whatever it is. We'd love to hear it. We're definitely going to get into the slower season, especially once the draft happens. So we'll have to get a little creative, and we'd appreciate any suggestions. That way we can make a topic and just have an open discussion so everybody can enjoy. But besides that, everybody have a wonderful rest of your day and week, and we'll be back next weekend to post another episode. Peace.